Hello and welcome to Tech Deals, Intel i5 CPU performance comparison. Today we are testing three different i5 CPUs from three different generations. The i5-2400 Sandy Bridge processor, the i5-4440 Haswell processor, and the i5-6400 Skylake processor. All three CPUs are running at 3.1 GHz. Each machine also has the same graphics card and the same amount of system RAM. Installed in each machine is EVGA's GeForce GTX 1050 Ti Superclock graphics card, a wonderful graphics card that I have previously reviewed. Link in the video description below to that review if you would like to see it. Each of the machines has 16 gigs of RAM. The only difference is clock speed because each platform runs on a different speed of RAM. The i5-2400 has 16 gigs of DDR3 1333 MHz RAM. The i5-4440 is running 16 gigs of DDR3 1600 MHz RAM, and the i5-6400 is running 16 gigabytes of DDR4 2133 MHz RAM. Otherwise, the machines are exactly the same. Each is running off a solid-state drive, and each, as I said, is clocked at 3.1 GHz. We are playing today at 1080p Full HD resolution. Very high detail settings are used. Anti-aliasing is on, and VSync is turned off. Fraps was used for the minimum, maximum, and average performance numbers you will see at the end of this video, but it was not used to record the video that you're watching. Instead, an external HD60 Pro hardware capture card was used, recorded on another computer. There is zero performance loss for the fact that I recorded this gameplay. The computer doesn't even know it was being recorded. The numbers in green at the top left corner of the screen are from MSI Afterburner, a free program that you can download from MSI.com to get real-time information on what your computer, your CPU, your RAM, your graphics card, etc. are doing in real time. I have done a video on how to set that up. Link in the video description below to go check that out. Now, I recorded over 1 hour of gameplay here between the three different cards. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you all hour and 15 minutes that I recorded because frankly it would get boring at some point. The entire point is to show you representative samples of the gameplay from each of the three different runs on the three different machines. We are currently watching the i5-2400 based machine. Take a look at the MSI Afterburner numbers at the top left corner of the screen. The first line is our graphics card itself, the GTX 1050 Ti. The percentage there is the percentage of the compute power, the compute calculating resources of the card that are currently in use. At the moment we have 82, 85, it's jumping around there, there's 96, 97%. It is not pegged at 100%. Usually in games, whenever you are graphics card limited, your total performance is entirely GPU based, that will be pegged at 99% and it will stay there. What this indicates is that the graphics card is not the primary limiting factor to more performance. It is one. We are using most of it. Anytime it hits 99% or even 95, 96%, basically we have reached the limit of the graphics card. But during this run, you will notice at times it drops down into the mid-80s. That means we should take a look at our other system components such as the CPU, system RAM, etc. Before we drop down there, let's just talk about temperature for a minute. The card is running at about 64 degrees Celsius. Warm for humans, but very reasonable for a graphics card. This card has no problems running in a basic pre-built system. This particular computer is a Dell Optiplex 790 mini tower case. No extra cooling, nothing fancy. This card is just inserted and run with no other upgrades besides the graphics card and the RAM itself. The third item is the clock speed of the actual chip itself on the graphics card, which is currently running at 1800 MHz. Now, this is an EVGA 1050 Ti superclocked card. If you look at the specs of the 1050 Ti, you will note that the base clock speed that EVGA advertises it at is 1354 MHz with a boost clock speed of 1468. Now wait a minute, you say, if it's 1468 MHz boost clock, how in the world are we running at 1800? Is it overclocked? Well, yes, it is overclocked, but I did not do it. I have not changed the settings in any way. This is GPU boost from NVIDIA automatically increasing the clock speed of the card. I have not adjusted the settings whatsoever. This card is stock, inserted and run as it comes out of the box. And this is the beautiful thing about the new 10 series cards from NVIDIA, is they boost very, very well. So we are running more than 300 megahertz faster than even the overclock clock speed provided by EVGA. How cool is that? Now, would it overclock higher? Yes, I absolutely believe this card would run at 2 gigahertz without a problem, at least 1900. The temperatures are fine. Anything up to about 80 degrees Celsius is within normal operating temperatures, but I don't normally overclock cards when I'm testing them. I run them out of the box, because that's how I believe the vast majority of people use their cards. They take their card, they put it in their machine, and they use it. I think the percentage of people who manually further overclock their card, excuse me, coming through, what are you doing, having a nice picnic, I'm running over you. The number of people who manually overclock their cards is small, but if you want to, MSI Afterburner provides an easy slider. You can simply drag it over 100 megahertz if you want to, and then monitor your temperatures to make sure that the card is not overheating. Finally, let's come to the VRAM itself, the line right below it. 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Come back here, I'm trying to steal your car. You don't mind, do you? Oh, excuse me. Oh, I think you got shot by the cops. They don't mind either. Now, on the VRAM usage, we're using about 3.3 gigabytes of our video RAM. Now, in my experience, Grand Theft Auto 5 at very high detail will run just fine on a 3 gigabyte card. Ow! Man, good thing I'm like invincible, because that would otherwise hurt. It does run in 3 gigabytes of RAM. It would not run in 2. If you bought the 1050 2 gigabyte card, you could not run this game smoothly at very high detail. You could run it at high detail. You'd have to turn the detail settings down from very high to high, but it would run on a 1050. But the 1050 Ti, with its 4 gigabytes of VRAM, lets you crank the details up to very high and enjoy it in all of its beauty and splendor. The clock speed of the VRAM is next. It is 3.5 gigahertz. Now, because it is... we're going for a jump. That's pretty cool. I'm sure the suspension and truck will be just fine after that jump. You could do that in real life. Oh, no. Are we going to hit that truck? Are we going to avoid? Yes! Super jump completed. Epic skills. Anyway. So, it's DDR memory, so double that. So, the memory on this card is actually running at 7 gigahertz. Effective clock speed. All that aside, let's come down to perhaps the most important point, because it's what we're testing today, the i5-2400 CPU itself. Now, this is a 4-core, 4-thread chip. So when the CPU usage is at 100%, we have maxed out all 4 of our processing cores on this chip. If it's at 50%, we're using 2 cores, 75%, 3 cores, and so on. Now, the temperature is very reasonable, 64 degrees Celsius. Again, this is a Dell Optiplex mini tower pre-built machine, stock cooling as Dell shipped it 5 years ago, no other changes. That's very reasonable. This just goes to show that a basic on-chip cooler does the job just fine for a non-overclocked, even 5-year-old processor on the old 32 nanometer production process, which is now 2 production processes out of date, but it obviously runs just fine. So if you buy one of these machines, don't mess with the cooling, it's just fine. Percentage of our CPU. Now, this is varying between 85 and 95%. But if you look up at the top, you'll see our GPU has dropped down to 76 to 82%. We are CPU limited here, not GPU limited. More graphics card would likely not make a major difference to performance. The only way a more graphics card would really make a difference is the fact that a higher end graphics card would have faster VRAM, which would help. It would have higher clock speed, which in certain situations would help. So a GTX 1060 running at 2 gigahertz with 8 gigahertz VRAM would provide some benefit. But because we are not using all of the graphics card that we currently have, essentially what you're seeing here is the most graphics card you need to play Grand Theft Auto 5 on an i5-2400. Now, what will the results be on the other 2 CPUs? Well, we're going to come to that in a minute. But I want to re-emphasize this point. Because the graphics card is not at 100% usage, the CPU is actually our primary limit to further performance. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing, This computer, as I purchased it, was $130 on eBay. These machines are an incredible value for the money. I have recently done a video talking about a $250 gaming machine. Now, depending upon the graphics card and what upgrades you want to make, that cost might creep up to $300. But consider this. If you buy one of these i5-2400 machines off of eBay for $120, $130, if you add a little bit of RAM to them and drop in either a 1050 or 1050 Ti graphics card or an AMD RX 460, would certainly work as well. You've got a computer that will play Grand Theft Auto 5 at very high detail at Full HD 1080p, and look at this, we're at 65 frames per second. What a deal! This is why I'm showcasing it. Yes, we are using all the resources of the machine. Yes, this is never going to run at 120 frames per second. This is never going to be really useful at high resolutions. But for the price of this computer, for what it costs to put this together today in 2017, this is incredible performance for the relatively small amount of money it will cost you to put it together. The question is spending double the money to get an i5-6400 going to provide noticeably better performance? That's why I'm making these videos. Now, there are other benefits besides just straight performance as to why you might want to buy a new computer versus a used computer. I'll talk about that in a minute. But finally, take a look at our main system RAM usage, 8.4 gigabytes of main system RAM. One upgrade that I do think is worth making is from 8 to 16 gigabytes of RAM if you want to play games like Grand Theft Auto 5 in 2017. Now let's take a look at the i5-4440. Again, 16 gigs of RAM, GTX 1050 Ti. The only major difference is the fact that we're now running a 4th generation Haswell chip instead of a 2nd generation Sandy Bridge chip. Now, this computer is an Acer Aspire consumer machine. I've had this for a couple of years now. It's a basic mini tower pre-built machine just like the Dell is. There's no fancy cooling in it. It's got a basic simple cooler on the CPU. It's in a standard mini tower case, basically a $400 basic consumer machine. All I've done is upgraded the RAM to 16 gigabytes, which it did not come with, and then inserted the GTX 1050 Ti graphics card. Now take a look at the GPU usage at the moment. Now all of the numbers are a bit low because I just started this run. One interesting thing I've noticed about Grand Theft Auto 5 is that the main system RAM usage and the overall system resources and frame rate seems to drop over time, especially as you drive through more and more of the city. It might have to do with how the game allocates memory or keeps track of what you've been doing. But take a look at the main system RAM usage right now. We'll get back to the other performance numbers, but we're currently at 5 gigabytes of RAM. Now, I just told you that I think you should upgrade to 16 gigs of RAM, and here we are at 5 gigabytes. Watch this number grow throughout this run. Now, open world games such as Grand Theft Auto 5 that do keep track of what's going on do tend to use more memory over time. Fallout 4 would be another good example of a game that resource creeps as you play. If you are on a limited resource system, it might be worth saving your game, closing it, rebooting the system, and launching it again every couple of hours of play if you have an extended game session in order to free up the RAM and just make sure that you have enough available resources to play, especially if you're running near the minimum of what a game requires. Now we'll come back to the performance numbers in a second, but I want to finish my thought regarding the benefits of an older machine versus a new one beyond straight performance numbers. When you go onto eBay and buy a 5-year-old i5-2400 base machine, or even a 3 or 4-year-old i5-4440 or 4460 based Haswell machine, you don't really get a warranty. You might get a 30-day warranty. Certainly PayPal will cover you if you get a machine and it doesn't work. The seller will have to make it right one way or another. But once you get beyond about 30 days, it's on you. You know, it works or it doesn't. You have your own system to deal with. If you buy a new one, you have a warranty and you don't have to worry about it for a year or more, depending upon the machine. The other issue is selection. Buying a used machine entails looking at different seller links, picking between different sellers, picking between different machines. deciding about whether or not you want to spend a little more to get a little bit more on the configuration, waiting for it to arrive, and then possibly doing more upgrades to it, installing an SSD or a larger hard drive, because many of those machines come with 250 gigabyte hard drives, which are old, slow, and not large enough to be particularly useful. You can use them, but they are pretty small, and many of those machines only come with 4 gigabytes of RAM, necessitating an upgrade there. However, the performance for the dollar is virtually untouchable. The amount of performance you get, oh, where are you going, sunshine? Come back with that car. Oh, well, I'll just magically spawn another one. There we go. Look at the comment sitting on the edge there. When you buy a new one, you go to Amazon, you click add to cart, you click checkout, you buy it, it arrives in maybe 2 days if you have Amazon Prime. If you have any problems whatsoever, you'll have an absolutely identical machine on your doorstep within 2 days. No muss, no fuss. Furthermore, while this game or that game may not show a large difference in performance, some do. I have recorded multiple games between these 3 machines, and I'll be posting those videos in the days to come. It is worth noting that in some applications there's very little performance difference. Excuse me, sir, in your very nice Rolls Royce. There is very little performance difference in, for example, integer math between an i5-2400 and an i5-6400. Floating point performance, however, is nearly double. What does your program need? What are you doing on the machines? Some applications absolutely do show a noticeable and dramatic performance difference. Most games don't, but there are some that do, and we'll get to that later in future videos. But for now, let me just say that for those on a budget, for those looking to get maximum value for the money, for those looking for a tech deal, the i5-2400s are just an unbeatable deal. For less than $150 plus a few upgrades, you've got yourself an amazing gaming machine. Now let's talk about the performance numbers that we can see here on this 4400 based machine. Now, over the next year, I expect these to start becoming available in larger numbers and the prices to start dropping on eBay. So the 2400s over the next year will start to go away to be replaced by the 3rd and 4th generation machines. Now, you'll note that I'm not testing a 3rd generation machine here. Essentially, you can assume that a 3rd generation, an i5-3450 or 3470, is going to perform somewhere in between a 2400 and a 4440. If I included an extra one, it would just make the video even longer. But the i5-3450 or 3470 would be the 2 to search for on eBay, or the i5-4440 or 4460, the 4460 being the Haswell refresh version of the 4440. Over the next year, these are going to be the next bargain deal on eBay. Currently, in January of 2016, when I'm filming this, these are still pretty expensive. If you go search for an i5-4440 on eBay right now, they're not discounted by that much. The price difference between buying a used 4440 and a new 6400 is small, because $400 buys you a brand new 6400, but you're going to spend $250 to $300 on a 4440. Used, with no warranty, with less hardware. Yeah, I would just buy it for $400, a new 6400, because it comes with 8 gigs of RAM, it comes with a 2 terabyte hard drive, it comes with a 300 watt power supply. It's just worth it in my opinion. The 2400s are the current deal. When I think that changes, I will post an updated deal video on my channel, letting you know and putting new links to what is ever the best deal at that point in time. So what are we getting performance-wise? Our GPU is currently using, about 90% of its compute power. It's jumping up to 100% or 99, which is basically the same thing, at various moments throughout this game, but it's not holding steady at basically 100% usage. Again, we are a little bit CPU performance limited. It's not as bad as in the first run, because this chip does have higher compute performance per clock cycle than the Sandy Bridge, than the 2nd generation. It's not a huge difference, but it is there, and it does reflect in CPU-intensive games such as Grand Theft Auto 5. However, take a look at the real-time frame rate. We're currently at about 75 frames per second. Now I am doing different things in different areas, so it's not 100% directly comparable, but I did play over 20 minutes on each of these cards. I did get enough driving around the city in different cars, doing different things, causing explosions, to try to average out those averages. Because if you just do a 3 or 5 minute run, it isn't enough total time for the averages to work themselves out. They're going to be dipping in different places due to explosions and other events, but if you play long enough, those tend to work themselves out and the averages will find the middle where it really should be. That was a pretty cool jump. They can't find me here. I'm going to get away, and oh no, they have helicopters. Maybe if I drive really, really fast, they won't be able to find. They shot out my tires again. Boy, they love shooting in the city, don't they? They're just crazy. Good thing cops in the real world don't just randomly start shooting at people who run away from them. Wait, they do that, don't they? But they at least don't do it from helicopters in the city, I guess. Hopefully they never play this game and decide that's a good idea. That would be ow. Boy, they also ram you a lot, don't they? Well, I'm going to shoot those cops because that wasn't very nice. I guess shooting them is not very nice. Okay, back to the performance numbers, sorry. GPU temperature. Now, the GPU temperature is higher on this machine than it was in the previous one. Why? Different case, different computer. There's a little bit less cooling in this case because, well, it's a different case. It's different airflow pattern, different fan pattern, so the GPU temperature is running a little bit warmer. Now, if you added an extra fan case, that would help and make a difference. However, 72 degrees is well within normal temperature. Anything up to about 80 degrees or so is fine for a modern graphics card. And then you'll see that our GPU clock speed is again running at about 1800 megahertz. I addressed that earlier in the video. Now, take a look at the second line, our 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, on this machine in MSI Afterburner, I just didn't reverse the order. This is actually the default order in MSI Afterburner, and I missed this one. It's a setting in MSI Afterburner. The clock speed of the RAM is first, the RAM usage is second. Now, on the next one, it'll be reversed correctly. I recorded all 5 games that I tested on each machine back to back, which is why it's going to be this way in each one of them. But we're using 3.3 gigabytes of VRAM, which is basically exactly the same as it was in the first one on the i5-2400. Main system RAM usage. Now, I commented on this when this run first started. We were around 5 gigabytes, even less, when this first started. Take a look at this. We're up to 6.6 gigabytes of main system RAM usage. I will tell you, this continues to creep. Before I finished playing on this machine, it was over 8 gigabytes. Now, I may not show all of that because I played for a while because I was in this truck and I was having entirely too much fun. I love doing this. I haven't even finished the story in Grand Theft Auto 5. I just drive around and smash things because it's just way too much fun. Don't worry, I only do it in the game. I wouldn't do that in real life. Doing it in real life, unfortunately, has consequences because I don't have cheat codes in real life to make myself invincible. That, and I don't actually know how to drive an 18-wheeler in real life. And I somehow don't think vehicles multiple score points. I don't think vehicles are nearly as durable in real life as they are in this game. They certainly don't fly through the air like that. Ow! I should get like extra points for making 2 cars fly in a row like that. So look at our main system RAM usage. Now we're at 6.7, creeping up on 6.8. The longer you play, the more you do, the higher that gets. Look at our frame rate. I'm smashing through cars. I'm driving through the city. I'm knocking things over left and right. 68 frames per second. This is a 3+ year old computer, almost a 4-year-old computer. This is an original Haswell 4th gen machine. There was the 4th gen original Haswell and then the Devil's Canyon refresh chips. An i5-4440 is the original release of the 4th gen. An i5-4460 is Devil's Canyon or Haswell refresh. Those were released almost a year later with a small clock speed bump and a small chip revision, but basically the same processors. In fact, in all honesty, the new 7th gen which just came out is largely a Skylake refresh, and I'm going to be talking about that in my Kaby Lake overview. Is the fact that the 7th gen and the 6th gen are more similar than they're not. There's a clock speed bump, there's a few extra changes and features added. The differences between the 6th gen and the 7th gen are relatively minor. So for those of you asking how much better would the performance be if this were an i5-7400 instead of an i5-6400, at least when we get to it? Not much. A little bit. A couple of percent. but it's a relatively, ooh, this is gonna hurt. This is not the place to take an 18-wheeler, and boom! Oh, I think I'm gonna have a headache in the morning from that crash. Alright, this goes on for a while because I was having too much fun. Let's trim this here and go take a look at the i5-6400. Now again, I'm showing you the settings the game was run at so that you can see all the settings were the same. We're going to be doing basically the same thing, driving around the city, causing a general menace and creating havoc everywhere that we go. Take a look at the main system RAM usage first. Notice we're back down to 5 gigabytes. This is the beginning of this run. Does Grand Theft Auto 5 play just fine on 8 gigs of RAM in 2017? Yes, it does. But over time, with extended gameplay sessions, it will run into being a limitation. I would recommend not playing for more than an hour or two on 8 gigs of RAM before maybe saving your progress or finding a stopping point, closing the game, rebooting the machine, and then launching it again will improve the overall smoothness of the game. Now, if you have 16 gigabytes of RAM, this is not an issue. You'll see that RAM usage creep up as we play in this run. GPU usage going to the top, 99%. Finally, we have a CPU that uses more. Wait, see, I spoke too soon. It just dropped. It stays at 99% more often on this run. This is a faster CPU. Even though the clock speed is basically the same as the other two machines, it is a newer generation. The instructions per clock cycle, the amount of work it can do per gigahertz is higher than on the other machines. Does it make it unplayable or vastly different compared to the other machines? Not really. You'll see the results here in just a couple of minutes. But it is faster. But it's not massively faster. It's a relatively minor difference. Way too often I see hardware reviews where they test the latest and greatest piece of hardware and they say, yes, it's faster. Fastest chip ever. Fastest hardware ever. New performance results. And it's 5% faster. Really? You're going to go out and replace your otherwise perfectly good working computer for 5%? What a waste of money. You generally won't notice a performance difference until it's at least a 20 to 30% performance difference. Now, everybody perceives performance differently, and it depends upon what the minimums and maximums and averages are, but 5% is a trivial difference. That's about the difference, for example, between the 6th and 7th gen. You will get maybe 5% more performance overall on a Kaby Lake, an i5-7400 versus 6400. Should you upgrade from a 6400 to a 7400? Heavens no, absolutely not. If you are on a 6th gen, or frankly even a 4th gen, even the 7th gen isn't going to do a lot for you. Now, will you notice the difference from a 2nd to a 7th? Well, yeah, you're starting to get into some real differences. It's cumulative. Each individual generation is only a few percent. Put 5 generations there, and it does start to add up over time. Speaking of performance difference over time, if you go to userbenchmark.com and compare the i5-7400 with an i5-2400, the effective speed difference they report is only 20%. I made a comment earlier in this video, which I'm not going to go back and re-edit because it takes a while to do the audio for these videos, but I'll put a correction in here. I made the comment that the i5-6400 was double the floating point performance of the i5-2400. That's actually not correct. It's double the floating point performance of the Core 2 Quad Q9650, which was the peak pinnacle 3 GHz top-of-the-line Core 2 quads before the i5s and i7s came out. I was looking at those numbers just before I filmed this, which is why I was thinking of it. I have a Q9650. I have been very tempted to drop one of these video cards in it and compare a nearly 10-year-old Intel quad-core 3 GHz chip against the latest and greatest 3 GHz quad-core Intel chips to see just how much progression has there been in nearly 10 years. I say nearly. The Q9650 didn't actually come out 10 years ago, but it's really close. We're coming up on 10 years on that chip. On that CPU, it is double the floating point performance compared to the 6400. So my earlier comment was just because I had that on the brain instead of the 2400. There are so many chips to keep track of. Making sure that you are 100% accurate in everything can be challenging, but I will correct myself anytime I make a mistake, so there you go. And we're back in my favorite big rig driving through town, causing a ruckus, creating a mess. Oh, that's gonna hurt. That looked like a nice car. Not anymore. One of the things that I wish Grand Theft Auto 5 would do would give you the option to turn on a running damage counter, to put a dollar value on everything that you damage or destroy. There could even be competitions or missions. Can you do $1 million or $10 million of damage in 5 minutes driving around? Ooh, man, those Rolls Royces are tough. That brought me to a stop. Sports cars are much easier to smash, like that one. Excuse me. Jeez. You would think that would crush a little more being driven over by a big rig, but hey, you know, video game physics. So if you're interested in seeing some tests between old Core 2 quads and modern Intel i5s, then give this video a thumbs up and make a comment down below. I'm not entirely sure that it's worth bothering with Core 2 quads at this point because they are so old, and frankly, because the i5-2400s are so cheap on eBay, the $30 to $50 less that a Core 2 quad costs, I'm not convinced is worth the savings because they genuinely are slower than the i5-2400. So, let me know if you're interested in that, and I'll think about doing one. So back to the performance numbers. If you have been watching the performance numbers in the upper left-hand corner throughout this run, you'll notice that they're very similar to the other two. Our GPU usage has stayed closer to 100% on this machine than it was on the other two. Grand Theft Auto 5 is tremendously CPU dependent. Will it run on an older or slower chip? Will it run on an i3? Yes, but it runs better on an i5. It really does use all of those cores. Look at the temperature. Our temperature has barely broken 60 degrees Celsius. More modern production process. This is a 14 nanometer chip. No custom cooling. This particular machine, this i5-6400, this is the $400 Acer Aspire T pre-built that I've recently reviewed on my channel. Great value for the money. Comes with 8 gigabytes of RAM, comes with a 2 terabyte hard drive. Great value. Drop in an extra 8 gigs of RAM, drop in a GTX 1050 Ti, and you've got great performance. It comes with a 300 watt power supply. I can confirm, by the way, that it will run on the existing 300 watt power supply an EVGA GeForce GTX 1060 using the 2 Molex connector to 1 6-pin PCI Express power connector adapter. Between the Battlefield 1 video that I posted yesterday and this video, which I'm posting today, I inserted that card, plugged in the adapter. Oh, that's gonna be bad. Turtle, let's get our truck fixed. Yay! It does work just fine without replacing the power supply. It's a 300 watt power supply. The computer does come with 2 of the 4-pin Molex connectors to allow you to use the adapter. In addition to that, I also installed the Asus Republic of Gamers RX 470 4GB Strix card that I recently reviewed on my channel as well. Great, amazing deal. Through the end of January, there's a mail-in rebate on that card. It's $150, $50 less expensive than a GTX 1060. However, it did not work using the adapter. Well, it did work. Windows booted, and I was able to run Windows, browse the web, and everything just fine. As soon as I launch a game, the machine freezes. Hard freeze. It needs a new power supply. The RX 470 pulls more power than a 1060 does, and so if you want to put an RX 470 into this machine, you are going to need to replace the power supply. A GTX 1060, however, works just fine, and I didn't just test a little bit. I gamed for several hours. I played World of Warships, Grand Theft Auto 5, and Battlefield 1. In fact, I did test Battlefield 1 on it. I will do a video on that at some point, but it does work just fine. Now, while it is true that a GTX 1060 costs more, if you have to replace the power supply, that kind of negates the savings. So my recommendation is if you want to install a higher powered graphics card than a 1050 Ti into the Acer Aspire T pre-built, a 1060 is the way to go because it won't require a replacement power supply, but the RX 470 or 480 will. Now, I realize at this point we're more than 30 minutes into this video. I don't make 5-minute videos. I do occasionally, but I really don't. Some people have said, hey man, your videos are so long, can you make them shorter? Well, what can I say? I have a lot to say and I use a lot of words, but I hope the information that I'm providing is useful or helpful to you. It's intended to be useful to people who don't necessarily know all these basics. Yes, if you have been modifying and upgrading computers for years, if you have memorized all the part numbers and you've installed 10 different video cards into 10 different machines, then some of this might seem a little bit basic. However, if you are fairly new to this, if you don't install video cards very often, if you don't upgrade your machine very often, then I hope these videos are helpful to you and provide you insight into whatever your own system or situation might be. One more quick performance shout out. Take a look at the main system RAM usage. This was down to 5 gigabytes when we started this run. We're not that long into this. What are we, 10, 15 minutes into this run? And we are over 7 gigabytes of RAM usage. I really believe playing AAA games in 2017, 16 gigs is the new amount of RAM to shoot for. Yes, you can play everything in 8 gigs of RAM, but 8 gigs comes with limitations. I strongly encourage you to upgrade to 16 gigs. Systems creep over time. Just running a 3, that was an epic jump. Uh-oh, my truck's in trouble. Quick, jump! Jump, Forrest, jump! It's gonna blow up! Leap! Go! Run away! That's going to be expensive. Oh well, it's not my truck. Boom! Excuse me, cops, you didn't need that either, did you? I am just a terrible citizen, aren't I? Alright, enough of this. Let's go take a look at the results. And here we are at the results. On the i5-2400, we averaged 69 frames per second. On the i5-4440, we averaged 71. And on the i5-6400, we averaged 74. Notice that is not a large difference between the 3 machines, even though that there is a large year and price difference between the 3 machines. What is more telling, however, are the minimum and maximum frame rates. The minimum frame rate on the i5-2400 was 33 frames per second, jumping to 41 on the 4440 and jumping to 53 on the 6400. Average frame rates only tells you part of the picture. On the i5-2400, we are in fact being CPU limited. You notice that if you were watching the GPU usage, it did not hold as high a percentage as it did on the later CPUs. That's causing lower minimum frame rates, more stutter. Will you get more performance in Grand Theft Auto 5 on a 6400 versus a 2400? Yes, you will. Average frame rates are higher, minimum frame rates are higher, max frame rates are higher. That being said, let me be clear. Grand Theft Auto 5 on very high detail is still completely and totally playable. Tons of fun on an i5-2400. Spend a bit more, get a newer machine, and it does run better. However, it's not a huge difference on a GTX 1050 Ti. However, how big of a difference would it be on a GTX 1060? I've actually tested that. I did test that a month or two ago, but I compared it not to the i5-6400, but to the i5-6500 set to 3.6 gigahertz. That was not a completely fair test since there is a half a gigahertz clock speed advantage on the 6500 versus the 2400. I will do another one of these videos comparing a 2400 to a 6400 to give an apples to apples comparison to show you what the difference is on a GTX 1060. But in conclusion, if you are going to run a GTX 1050 Ti or a GTX 1050 or RX 460 from AMD, then it doesn't make a large difference about whether you have a 5-year-old or a brand new i5 machine. So long as you have any i5 machine from the past 5+ years, then you're going to be just fine at 1080p at very high detail. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel using the big huge red button directly below this video. Questions and comments in the comment section below, and as always, check out my video description below. If you like my videos, if you found this helpful, useful, and informative, the video description is where it's at. Links to Amazon, Newegg, and eBay will all be in the video description below. If you're interested in buying the $400 Acer Aspire T or the video cards that I mentioned, links to those to Amazon and Newegg will be down below. If you're interested in an i5-2400 deal, a link to eBay with a pre-search set of results will be down below, as well as a link to my video reviews of both the Acer Aspire T machine as well as the i5-2400 machines. Check all that out in the video description below. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching my video. I will see you next time.